Hello and welcome to the Garden Log with me, Ben Dark. This is episode number 54, coming to you after a slight delay, for which I am truly sorry. I hope that hearts have grown fonder in my absence. My goodness, the weeks that I missed. What happened? We had blazing February heat. I started wearing shorts in the penultimate week of February, which must be some sort of record. Of course, it was an apocalyptic crisis in terms of climate change, and it was very bizarre to feel that, because normally reports of the world going to hell in a human-shaped handcart come with flames over the California desert or mudslides in a high Himalayan pass, and to have such dire foreshadowings of end days personified by little happy bumblebees off visiting early daffodils felt slightly strange. But slightly strange is what we like about gardening. I have been away for a few weekends, which is why the recording schedule slightly slipped, off doing laddish things to celebrate upcoming weddings, and generally absenting myself from the world of horticulture. During the weeks, though, I have been at work hard, looking at things, planting things, and growing things. And my goodness, things are growing at this time of year. I can always tell it's spring. Well, there are very many obvious signs. When you are trained in horticulture, as I am, you pick them up. But one of the signs that I get is an increase in little WhatsApp picture messages from friends and family and loved ones saying, "What on earth is that? What's this? I saw this, what's that?" They come thick and fast at this time of year. I think normally by midsummer, where there are flowers everywhere, no one is stopping to contemplate, no one is shocked by the perfectness of a single bloom. But here we are starved. We are like floral alcoholics, shaking and twitching, craving our next petal. And then suddenly the petals come thick and fast and we don't notice them anymore. But I've been getting texts this week about anemone blanda that has been surprising a few people, and some of the earlier double-flowered Kerria that has warranted a few little messages on telephones. It's very exciting. I do like these signs of interest amongst my acquaintances. It makes me very pleased that I am not a doctor. Anyway, it was a bizarre and strange week. I'm not going to go too much into how weird the heat was. I think the strangest times I had was on the Monday after that very, very warm weekend, and the nights were still getting very, very cold. But the afternoons, particularly, were this wonderful sort of hot tub tepid temperature. I had this strange dissonance standing on the station platform, which had been heavily salted and gritted in fear of the early morning frosts, while getting gently cooked by what felt like a June afternoon. But that's enough of that nonsense. Let's go and take a week in the life of a head gardener and find out what on earth I got up to. On Monday, I was separating a mixed hedge, which is a very glamorous job. I am a huge fan of mixed hedges. I love the blackthorn and rosa rugosa and ash mixtures that you get populating the countryside. But I'm not a fan of certain mixes, and one of them I don't like is a mix of beech and yew. Two hedges in a mix doesn't tend to work anyway because they're too blobby. It looks like an awfully bad camouflage job has been done on the hedge, even if they're in leaf at the same time. But yew and beech, particularly as one is evergreen and one is not, tend to emphasise this. Now this is a young hedge, so the roots were not completely entwined, so I was able to dig out the little beech whips and move them away. Thankfully, I think I've got them just in their winter dormancy. They haven't begun to spring into life again, so I can move them and plant them without disturbing them too much. It's strange this time of year. You think winter's going to go on forever, and then suddenly it ends, and you're desperately trying to rush around accomplishing all of those last winter jobs. It's like the closing scenes in an awful nightclub where people realise, oh my God, I haven't hooked up with anyone yet. Quick, rush. And time is against you, and looks are against you, but gosh, you go for it anyway. So that's sort of what it's like, but with winter jobs, with the last of the apple pruning and hedge moving and other things in that ilk. Now the yew will be left to grow on into something more dignified, stately, and ecclesiastical. And the beech can go off and be rather more russet and springy and exciting in a separate place. I've used it to infill a couple of gaps in existing hedges where things have been shaded out and got a bit thin. It was a useful and fairly satisfying sort of job. And what was nice about it was physical, because the next day, Tuesday, was spent almost entirely sedentary. We went off with the great and the good in the world of ryegrass and fescue for a sports turf seminar. I don't know if anyone has been to sports turf seminars. They're really incredible things. It is where the experts of the blades of grass movement come together to share tips. There is no nonsense. There is no care for aesthetics. Well, I suppose the only aesthetic they care about is summer greenness and winter greenness. They just want the healthiest roots and the firmest soil for them to grow on. There was the head groundskeeper at Twickenham giving a little talk. The Mr. Green of English cricket was there. One of the most interesting talks was from a soil scientist, and he was telling of the importance of compost teas. And I've always thought of a compost tea like a comfrey solution that you might make in an urn in an old kitchen garden, almost because it's just one of those jobs that you do, handed down to you for generations. All got to make the comfrey tea. And I thought of it as a dose of nitrogen almost for the plants, something they could take off and put into new herbaceous growth. But he was talking about compost teas as an organic matter component of the soil. And when I think of soil amelioration with organic matter, I think of it as improving structure, as creating little bundles and balls and boulders of organic mush, so that water can run out more effectively, so that worms come up, so that roots snake around and down and generally form a denser, more compact feeding network. But no, this was talking about feeding the fungi in the soil, feeding them with bacteria from the compost tea. And it's the growth of this fungus that helps keep turf together, that gives soil a structure, because the fungus spreads out these miraculous hyphae, these tentacular microscopic structures that act as a sort of grid, like a mesh, keeping the soil together, which I thought was fantastic. He pulled an unwitting head gardener from the audience. This was the chap who looks after Regent's Park. And the Regent's Park chap told us about their use of it. And it's far removed from a load of comfrey with a brick sitting on top of it. They are using aerators and bubbling oxygen through, almost like a giant fish tank bubbler. And into this mix, they're feeding mixes of seaweed and molasses for the bacteria to feed in. It is almost halfway to brewing. And then they brew up this fantastic concoction and water it down onto the rose beds. I've seen that rose garden. It's looking magnificent. And he can take great credit for that. And he talked about this tea with the zealous passion of a real convert. And I have come away enthused, and I'm looking at 50-litre containers with bubblers myself. I think I'm going to start cooking up some stinking compost teas and playing with my bacterial content. I think the only danger is a slight risk of giving all garden visitors E. coli. So there is a lesson for you. Don't go to Regent's Park and spread the petals on the roses on your Instagram lunch. Because anyway, so that was Tuesday. There were other interesting elements of the day. There were lots of people demonstrating fantastically giant lawnmowers powered by drone technology from the Nevada desert. The robot lawnmowers are coming. One practical piece of advice I took from the Twickenham man was to go and dig holes in your garden. You can use probes, you can use soil science, but there's something to be said for a metre deep shaft and a peer at the soil strata. So, on Wednesday, I dug a hole in the worst section of our lawn, the section of lawn that is turning sort of Boris Johnson hair colour and texture. And I noticed a very, very, very compact upper layer. I think that the turf was probably laid on very bad and incredibly compacted soil, and that it's been top-dressed a few times with a very, very, very silty mix, which has almost solidified into its own rudimentary concrete. And to combat this, the lawn is growing this wonderful furze and fuzz of thatch, all of these old stems and bits of roots, because it's trying to create its own growing medium almost. And so I'm going to combat this with lots of flagellation and spiking of myself and the lawn. I'm going to run bladed machines all over it. And I started that on Wednesday, getting out onto the tractor with one of those spiking bars behind it that go deep into the soil and out again, and deep into the soil and out again. And the aim of this is less the holes made than the trauma to the soil. If you think of my silty concrete layer, and if you think of a sheet of concrete and were I to drive a vast metal pin into that concrete, I wouldn't just make a hole. I would make a hole and a load of radiating cracks. And this is what I want to do to the soil. I want to make the hole and then have lots of cracks running away from it. And as the season progresses and we get more extremes of dew and of heat, the little micro cracks will expand and contract and expand and contract, and bits of air will come into the soil, and roots will chase this air, and aerobic bacteria will thrive in these air pockets, and then worms will come up and fungi will come, and then suddenly this dead soil will start to resemble some nutrient-rich Petri dish. I'm sorry if you can hear a slight tapping. The rain is coming down rather heavily on the skylight above me. It's quite a nice background, probably. So. Anyway, on Wednesday, that's Wednesday probably finished. Once I dug a hole, examined the problem and driven the mower about, it was time to move on to Thursday. Thursday was spent at university. I was studying the Bozarth movement over in America, where they have gardens on a literally monumental scale. It's full of these wonderful double height porticos. If you can imagine a house with a portico, so that's the fancy name for a porch, and that normally goes up to just above the height of the door, somewhere in between the first story windows, but you can do a whole extra story, so it goes up between the second story windows, and then you get this massively elongated porch structure that just looks quite out of place and ostentatious. And that really sums up the Bozarth Garden. It has these fantastic things, I think, full-length pergolas, like the solid arts and crafts pergolas that stretch out into the gardens, but without the honest, quite humble, bit po-faced brickwork of the arts and craft ones. These are full Ionic or Corinthian columns, giant great things all in a line with clematis and whatever else growing up them. So I found that very exciting. And we looked at one of them that belonged to Nelson Rockefeller when he was at the Museum of Modern Art, when he was one of the great directors or trustees there. and he apparently used to ring up from New York and shout, "My statue of blah, blah, blah. I want it moved. I want it gone. I want it. Get the helicopter." And they'd fly up the helicopter and winch down with straps and move these 4-ton statues somewhere else in the garden, so that when he came back for the weekend, it would be in the correct position, which was no doubt very useful for him. I didn't have a helicopter in the garden. I could have used one on the Friday because I was moving a statue. This is a vast, amorphous female form in sort of pink marble. We managed to get it down and onto a pallet, and then it was a selection of boards and balancing and levers, and we took it from its plinth and position and laid it into storage. Whether it will go back up in the garden is yet to be decided. There is now a space for more statuary in the ostentatious Bozarth manner. And then Friday I took a stroll around the garden. I mourned the passing of the snowdrops, but mourned it in the manner of someone having finished the last bite of a delicious starter course, and who knows that there's mains and puddings to come, and maybe a little after dinner drink. So don't worry, there's more on the way. But gosh, wasn't it tasty? And I mourned them, and I contemplated the magnificent sun-baked glory of the crocuses. They do appear in dull weather to be pointless little things. They almost seem like mushroom stalks from which the cup has been knocked off, until the sun comes out and they're these glorious, generous cups of sunshine. The first of the little daffodils, all of the tete-a-tete and things are coming up. Interestingly, tete-a-tete daffodil is named for the double-headed nature. It often has 2 heads on a stalk, except it doesn't seem to anymore. It seems that they are, at least in this garden, just little dwarf daffodils now, without the multi-headed factor. So there is some sort of reversion or communal shift going on in the tete-a-tete. Who knows who we should blame? Other things that are looking good. There's good scilla out in the garden. I planted quite a lot of Scilla siberica, which is a very dark blue scilla. And there's another one in the garden that's a much, much lighter blue. If anyone is a fan of the Oxford boat race, Scilla siberica is more of the Oxford boat colour, and the light blues, the Cambridge blues, is more of this scilla. And scilla is very funny because unlike other bulbs this time of year, which emerge from the ground, leaf first, and then thrust up a flower stalk which you watch bud and open. That's the trick of the snowdrop, the daffodil, and the tulip. The scilla emerges flower first. It comes out of the ground winking blue. And so for various stages in the middle of it, it's quite bizarre. It almost looks like a dishwasher soap, this pale one, bubbling out of the ground, this heaving mass of foam. And it will slowly grow, and then leaves will start appearing, and it will look more like a coherent plant. But it's quite interesting to see at this time of year. Other things are rushing onwards. The magnolias are in that fantastic bud stage, the bit that you want before them opening, where they really are something from a very valuable Chinese silk dressing gown, more than a real-life piece of biology. It is an absolutely glorious time of year, one that you wish would almost slow down. I suppose it's like having a kitten, and you think, why can't these moments go on and on and on? But we've got months and months, and our kitten shall turn into a summer cat, and we will like it as a summer cat, but always fondly remember those days when it was a little scilla kitten. Anyway, that's enough of the current state of the garden. Let's see if I have any recommendations for us this week. My recommendation this week is a piece of advice it might not be relevant to many of you, but if any of you are lucky enough to be considering hiring a full-time gardener to work on your estate, then I think this is useful advice to bear in mind. It's from Charles Paget Wade, who was an interwar architect and the heir to a sugar fortune and a writer amongst many other things. And this advice came to me as quite timely because in my career there have been several times when I've been asked to do something in a garden and I thought to myself, no, I can't. That goes against all of horticulture. It goes against the academy, against the science, against the research, against the trial beds at Wisley. I can't do that, sir. It's not best practice. And several times I've been overridden, and quite rightly, because it's not my garden. I'm just there to do the work, and told, no, don't be so silly, do it. And generally speaking, whatever I was asked to do out of season has worked and flourished. Maybe not as well as it might have done, but it hasn't been a disaster. And I thought of this when I heard Charles Paget Wade talking about the experience his poor father had with his gardener in Yoxford. He said of the gardener, but he became such an autocrat it ceased to be our garden anymore. It became his garden in which we were allowed to walk. If asked to move a plant, we were always told it's the wrong time of year, or the plant's too old or too young, or the moon not old enough. In any case, it would die if moved. He ordered all the seeds and plants and put them where he wished. Our only part was to pay. I took warning from this when I came to Snow's Hill, preferring to have my own garden and not a gardener's garden in which I was allowed to walk. When the workmen were here repairing the old house, I noticed a labourer who was a good worker and very tidy in all he did. I liked his name, which was Hodge, his hat, which was mauve, and having asked him, I was satisfied that he knew nothing about gardening beyond cabbages and cauliflowers. So here was my very first man. The garden has remained my garden these 25 years, and at my wish plants are moved in spite of the time of year, in spite of their age or the age of the moon, nor do they invariably die, but flourish abundantly. So I think that is a lesson to all of us, a lesson to me that I am a counsellor, not a king. It is my place to provide advice rather than decide exactly what happens. And a lesson to anyone who is thinking of heading down the road of employing a gardener, or any of you gardeners employing an assistant. A tidy, willing to work assistant is going to be worth their weight in gold, much more than someone with ideas. You don't want that at all. It's quite interesting. Brent Elliott, the garden historian, traces this kind of thing as part of a general shift away from the veneration of brilliant gardeners, the likes of the Paxtons in the Victorian era, into the arts and crafts movement, which had a general disregard, even a dislike for professional gardeners, and an adoration of the aristocratic amateur plantsman, your Vita Sackville-Wests, your Jekyll herself. And that I think really continues. If you read Christopher Lloyd, if you read The Well-Tempered Gardener, which I really suggest you do, he is very down on professional gardeners. And this is all a part of it. Anyway, that's my advice and my recommendation for the week. I saw there's also some Monty Don Japanese gardening programs on television, which I'm sure are very good. I've watched half of one of them due to scheduling clashes, but it seemed very enjoyable. The man was in his element, so I suggest you go and watch a bit of that. It's also time to start thinking about your lawns. I have reseeded a patch of lawn in my garden, and it might be regarded as too early, but it is a London garden, which is practically Mediterranean, and it's the patch of lawn that was killed by sprawling nasturtiums last year. That is enough horticulture for 1 week. I hope you enjoyed listening. You can find me, should you wish, on Twitter at Ben's Garden, on Instagram at Gardener Dark, and on Facebook. There's a group where you can ask questions and see pictures, which is the Garden Log Podcast, the group, not the page. I hope that you find time amidst the green rush of spring to listen to the next few episodes. I think that they are going to be full of rising sap and excitement. But that's something for next week. Until then, have a wonderful time, whether you're in the garden or not. Thank you very much, and goodbye.